Hello, everybody, and welcome to Living with Lions, the Mountain Lion Foundation's monthly webinar series. I'm Gowan Batiste. I'm the Coexistence Programs Manager for the Mountain Lion Foundation. So the Mountain Lion Foundation, where you found yourself today, is a national not-for-profit organization, and our work is focused on ensuring that the ecologically critical mountain lion survives and thrives in the wild. We do this important work in three key ways. First, wherever people live or hike or work in mountain lion country, we offer proactive community-based coexistence training and support. So we help people keep themselves, their families, and their livestock safe while also keeping their lion neighbors safe. Secondly, we work with partners and volunteers and people like you all across the US to advocate at the state and federal level to ensure that strong protections are in place for mountain lions and their habitats. We stand up for lions wherever they are being overhunted or otherwise persecuted, and that's especially important because lions make ecosystems healthier, and healthy ecosystems are more resilient in the face of climate change. Third, and very importantly, we do a lot of educational programming to correct misconceptions about mountain lions and help people and political decision makers understand just how important they are and how straightforward and cost-effective it can be to coexist peacefully with mountain lions. Our Living with Lions webinar series each month covers a new angle on how people and mountain lions can peacefully coexist. So as a little bit of housekeeping as we go through this webinar, please use the Q&A down below. It's right next to the chat. It won't interrupt the presentation or make a noise or be distracting. As your questions come up, please put them there because when we get to the Q&A at the end, we'll be able to answer them in chronological order, and that is fantastic. So I'm very excited about the presentation that we have today. Will Stolzenburg writes, I write about animals for three reasons: because I find them wondrous and good for the soul, because it haunts me how badly we treat so many of them, and because they deserve every voice, every compassionate ally we can muster on their behalf. So Will, as a writer, covers the science of wildlife conservation, focusing on misunderstood critical carnivores. His first book is Where the Wild Things Were, a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers selection. Following the success of this first book was Rat Island, a true tale of oceanic predators run amok on oceanic islands, and then Heart of a Lion, which follows in the footsteps of a heroic young mountain lion who walked his way across America, thousands of miles through enemy lines from the Black Hills of South Dakota to the outskirts of Manhattan. In 2012, an experience with a wounded puppy resulted in the book Towpath's Tale, chronicling the puppy's unspeakable suffering and miraculous recovery. Will lives in the Washoe Valley of South Reno. I'm very excited for this talk. And with that, Will, I'm going to pass the webinar off to you.
Okay. Thank you, Gowan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I wasn't even aware, to be honest, to confess, I wasn't even aware that there was such a thing as a National Cougar Day, which is today, of course, until it was mentioned by Elizabeth just a couple of weeks ago when she invited me to do this. And I wholeheartedly agree with the sentiment. But it does beg the question, I mean, what is it about this animal that inspires us, that warrants a day of its own, that inspires us to write books about it and make movies about it and spend our lunch hour sharing stories about it? So I've decided for this presentation, I'm gonna tackle that question. And I'm gonna do it by kind of dividing our animal into three different categories of catum, shall we say. There's the charismatic cat, there's the keystone cat, and then there's the goodwill cat. And I will go through these in order with a little bit more explanation. First of all, the charismatic cat, this one probably answers itself. I mean, just look at this animal. It's lithe, it's graceful, it's powerful. This is an animal that can leap 40 feet in a bound and 15 feet straight up. And speaking of which, it is a powerful predator. This is, among all the great cats, this is the ranking giant killer. It is able to take prey up to 8 to 9 times its own size. Speaking of which, right here in the Washoe Valley, in the Virginia range that I live right at the base of, there are mountain lions who specialize on mustangs. And let me tell you, these mustangs are tough customers. And we're talking about animals that weigh upwards of 900 to 1,000 pounds. For those of you who think your cats are a little too finicky for water, well, that does not describe the mountain lion, which have been proven to be great swimmers. They have crossed all of the great rivers of this country, from the Columbia to the Colorado, the Mississippi, across the Missouri, the Hudson, you name it. In fact, those last three rivers that I just mentioned, one particular cat crossed every one of those in one single journey across this country, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Adaptable cat. This is an animal that is known all the way from northern Canada to Tierra del Fuego, boreal forest to southwest deserts to Amazonian rainforest to Patagonian steppes. This is the most widely distributed mammal, outside of us, of course, in the Western Hemisphere. Keystone cat. For me, the most exciting development in all of community ecology over the past 50 or 60 years has been the recognition of these apex predators like our mountain lion as keystone species. Keystone species meaning that they enliven and they enrich, they alter the living landscape that is far out of proportion to their relative rarity. And by the same token, when you remove these keystone cats or keystone creatures, keeping to the metaphor, you basically are taking one of the building blocks out of that archway of life, the keystone. And when that happens, the whole edifice tends to come tumbling down. Now, the mountain lion of late has been proving itself to be a keystone among keystones. The more information we learn about this animal, the more amazed we are about how it impacts the communities that it lives in. Now, it does this in several ways. Of course, it's a predator of big animals, primarily big ungulates, big hoofed animals. And by preying on these animals, it weeds the sick and the weak and strengthens the herd. But it may have an even bigger impact without ever laying a paw on these animals, through imparting a sense of fear and what am I trying to say? Fear and vigilance in these animals. And how this works is that, for example, it chases or it fears or it scares animals like deer and elk, the ones that would normally be hanging out, say sipping down in their favorite canteen in the stream side, unaffected. It keeps these animals moving. It keeps these animals from overbrowsing, overgrazing, and denuding the very habitat that they are a part of. And by keeping these animals moving, it grows flowers, it grows trees, and these forests that grow up around this place, they in turn attract a whole host of animals that come to feed and to take cover in what we might very well call cougar gardens. Now, another big thing that has recently been discovered about the mountain lion or cougar is its ability to provide food for other animals. It's a big predator who oftentimes bites off more than it can chew. It's a solitary predator, so many times it takes more than one feeding to finish its food. And while the mountain lion is away digesting its meal, the scavengers come to feast. And there are hundreds and hundreds of species who are making good livings, from beetles to bears, making good livings on the leavings of these animals. In fact, it has lately been calculated that mountain lions every single day provide 3.3 million pounds, 3.3 million pounds of meat for scavenger communities across the Western Hemisphere. Here's another thing we should consider as a keystone predator. It's a more intimate one, and it involves us. Roughly 200 of us are killed every single year in deer vehicle collisions on our highways. And a lot of those happen in the eastern United States, where there are a lot of deer and no cougars. So it begs the question, well, what would happen if we reintroduce cougars, or if they were to come back in some way? And in fact, a team of scientists has tackled that, and they have modeled the results, and they're pretty interesting. Over the next 30 years, they gather that having mountain lions recolonize, say, the 19 states that they no longer are living in would save us people, 155 human lives. It would save us 21,000 wrecks on the highway and more than $2 billion in vehicle damages just from returning the cougar. Now, I'm mentioning this for all of us out here who are probably here because we love cougars, but it bears mentioning that there is another segment of our society out there who would just as soon see them dead. Every single state that harbors a population of mountain lions in the West, every state except for California, has a state wildlife agency that promotes the killing of wildlife, or killing of, I should say, mountain lions. And they do this on one overarching fallacy, which is that mountain lions need to be hunted. And the logic goes that if you don't hunt mountain lions, they will reproduce out of control. They will overrun the countryside. They will eat all of our hunters, deer and elk, all of our ranchers, cattle and sheep. And then they will start coming for us and plucking our kids off the bus stop. Now, there's an old saying that if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. And this, in fact, is basically etched into the playbook of most of our state wildlife agencies and the anti-predator hunting groups that support them. But in the interest of truth, and I would like to think that there is a corollary to that axiom, that if you repeat a truth often enough, that eventually trumps the lie. So in the interest of truth, here is what 50 years of lion science says about the need to hunt mountain lions. Number one, no, there's no need to hunt mountain lions. Mountain lions self-regulate. In other words, they don't reproduce like rabbits. They self-regulate their own populations. And they do this by partitioning themselves around widely across the landscape in these territories that are strictly defended. And I say strictly, oftentimes the male mountain lion who holds the biggest territory of all will actually kill intruders. Trespassers are treated very harshly. There is no overpopulation of mountain lions. If we do not hunt the mountain lions, they are not going to eat all of our deer and our elk. In fact, they strengthen the herds, again, as I've mentioned before, by trimming the sick and the weak and the excess from these animals. So in any case, there's a new study out too now that suggests that they may even be selecting for those animals who are infected with chronic wasting disease, a fatal neurological brain disease. So they are a benefit to the hunter, if anything. Are we going to shutter the livestock industry because we're not hunting our lions? If you look at all of the calamities that befall open range cattle and sheep in this country, mountain lions fall way, way down on the list of causes. They are almost insignificant. Most of the ranchers have no problem with mountain lions. That being said, there are some hot spots where aberrant rogue mountain lions are causing some trouble for individual operators. And for these, we know we have very effective non-lethal methods that folks like the Mountain Lion Foundation promote that are far more effective than just randomly killing mountain lions across the landscape. Does killing mountain lions make us safer? No. In fact, the more we learn about killing mountain lions, the more we learn that that's the last thing you want to do if you want to protect your human population. And it works like this. When you hunt mountain lions, you invariably create orphans. You kill females with kittens who become orphans. And orphan kittens almost invariably will starve to death if they're not taken by another predator or an accident. And you can bet that before a kitten starves to death, it's going to look out and it's going to, out of desperation, it's going to make do with whatever comes down the trail. And we're just very lucky that we haven't seen more of this. One of the other aspects of hunting is most hunters like to go for, like this animal here, big toms. As I said before, big toms are the landlords of cougar society. When you remove a big tom from society of cougars, what it does is, as the saying goes, it invites 3 juvenile delinquents to the funeral. And these are the cats, these young male mountain lions, who are in fact the ones that are most likely to get into trouble, to test maybe those sheep in the pasture, or God forbid, and this happens, in astronomically low percentages, but again, facing and maybe testing one of us on the trail. So all that being said, it is time that we, for the sake of the lions, for the sake of the wildlife, for the sake of our democracy, it is time we speak the truth to these lies, because they are like it's not like these are going away. These are the drumbeat of the agencies these days, and they need to be countered. And on that measure, there's a group I'd like to mention here who is tackling this issue and is seeking a better form of wildlife management from our state agencies. It's called Wildlife for All. Wildlife for All, one word.us if you want to look it up. And we'll post it, I think, in the chat afterwards. But they're basically trying to impart a better sense of democracy. They're not an anti-Hunty group. They're looking to impart a better sense of democracy and fairness, fair chase, and compassion into the management of our wildlife. So give them a shot. Have a look. If you want to find out what your how your state is treating your wildlife, give a look. That brings us to, yes, finally, public service announcement is over. Back to the celebration, Goodwill Cat. Yeah, over the last 25 years, there have been several individual cats that we have come to know that have really broadened our perspective and given us this rare peek into the secret lives of what these cats we thought we knew and are learning a lot about. Now, not only are we learning about lions by getting these close-up glimpses of them, we're getting a look at our own society and how we get along with them. Number one, this is a family of cats. In 1999, this lioness and her 3 kittens were discovered up on this butte overlooking overlooking the National Elk Refuge in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And of course, word got out, and very soon the road beneath this butte was filling every day with 500 onlookers with their binoculars and their spotting scopes, getting a glimpse of this family. This family also in time inspired a book. Her name, the lioness's name became Spirit, and the book became Spirit of the Rockies. And that in turn inspired a cougar advocacy organization, just like Mountain Lion Foundation, the Cougar Fund. You may all recognize this cat. This is probably the most famous cougar of all. This is P22, and P22 was a young male when he left his home colony in the Santa Monica Mountains of California. And against some astronomical odds, he made his way across 2 of the busiest, most lethal freeways in all of the country, only to find himself in the middle of Los Angeles in an urban wilderness called Griffith Park. And the problem was, once he got there, he couldn't get out without risking his life like he did to get there. Now, again, very quickly, just like Spirit, very quickly, P22 became a celebrity. And he became an international celebrity. I mean, we watched him on home videos walking down Sunset Boulevard past Rolls Royces. He was featured almost weekly by the LA Times, the latest exploits of P22, National Geographic. 60 Minutes did a segment on him. He was the Brad Pitt of mountain lions. And eventually there actually was also a P22 day where thousands of Angelinos would gather every year to honor the favorite feline son. Now, P22 entertained us for 10 years, which is a really long time for a mountain lion, until old age, some old injuries, and a recent run-in with a car left him unable to care for himself and properly hunt. And when biologists gathered him up to check him out, they decided there was no quality of life left in P22, and they very humanely put him down, to thousands of tears around the country. But P22 was a great ambassador. P22 posed this question: if an animal like this can live in the middle of Los Angeles, where can we not have cougars these days? It also said a lot about Angelinos, and that these people, they did not run in fear of this animal. They revered him. They welcomed him. He was a hero. And finally, this animal, and this is probably the most lasting tribute that P22 inspired. This is the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing, and it just broke ground this year. It's a roughly $92 million project that is intended to connect the population that P22 came from in the Santa Monica Mountains, which is a population of only 8 or 9 mountain lions. They are severely hemmed in. They are suffering inbreeding, the genetic spiral. And this, with hopes, will allow for those animals to seek bigger wildlands to the north and restore some of its genetic integrity. Integrity. This next animal is not quite so popular as P22, mainly because he didn't live quite as long and because, well, he didn't grow up in Hollywood. But this is an animal just like P22 that left his mom and his homeland as a young male cat, and his homeland happened to be in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Now, most of the lions who are leaving the Black Hills, they head west back into the Rockies. This animal, like a few others are doing these days, headed east into the plains. And what he did was over the next couple months, we watched this animal cross the entire state of South Dakota. He crossed the Missouri River, and this is very hostile territory for a mountain lion to be. He crossed over into Minnesota. He was seen several times in the Twin Cities, crossed the Mississippi, made his way all the way through Wisconsin, into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, into Canada, across the international boundary, back down into New York, and after nearly 2 years on the road, came within 23 miles as the pigeon flies from Manhattan. And it was just a week before he was tragically run down by an SUV on the Wilbur Cross Parkway in Southwest Connecticut. And just like P22, Walker, as we called him, was a great ambassador for the cats. I mean, Walker showed, among all things, that these cats aren't coming to hurt us. I mean, when you consider all of the different people that he met along the way, all the barnyards, pastures, and corrals that he walked by without incident. When you consider also all of the people who welcomed him, I ended up retracing some of Walker's steps. I went to the places where he was seen, and I interviewed people and sat with them. And to a T, these people were ecstatic. They were grateful to have been in the presence of this great cat. He's also, he's begged the question, he and several others, hundreds of others actually, have been attempting the same route. He so far has made it the farthest. But the question arises, well, if this cat can make it that far, and then, by the way, when he was eventually killed, they opened him up and he was a healthy cat. He was living large in a part of the country that no longer has cougars. The question remains, what about the East for cougars, where half of this country has been off limits to these animals for nearly a century now? Well, a team of scientists has actually approached that problem, and they've done some metrics, and they have determined that there are, in fact, no less than 17 different swaths of wildness, from Minnesota to Maine, from Arkansas to Georgia, that are big enough, healthy enough, fertile enough, and safe enough to once again harbor populations of mountain lions. You may have noticed, as I'm standing here, I'm also looking out through my study window into the desert hills of the Virginia Range outside of Reno here. And when I look up there, I see the hills that are cut through with rugged canyons and capped with rim rock. I see spots of Mustangs walking across those slopes. So when I look up there, I automatically think lion country. But I will tell you this, in all of my ramblings about lion country, I have yet to see a mountain lion. I will tell you this, what I have seen, I've been up there and I've walked past horses with horrendous wounds on their faces and their necks. I have seen young foals, just days old, frolicking with their families on one day and missing the next. I have stood in a ravine and watched 4 huge mule deer with these Christmas rack antlers come charging past me with that look in their eyes. So I know, and I love knowing that the second I step foot on those hillsides, there is a possibility that up there on that rim rock looking down at me is an animal that can leap 40 feet in a bound. An animal up there who is making a living, who can, perhaps on horses, bringing down 900 horses, 900-pound horses, and yet an animal who very shyly retreats at the approach of this very small and skinny little ape. I find this awesome. I mean, I find this awe-inspiring and I find it humbling. And it turns out I have a hunch that this is these emotions that I'm feeling for mountain lions, and maybe for those of you out there too, that these emotions are hard baked into our DNA. Because there was a time way, way back in, say, the infancy of our humanhood, way back in those savannas of ancient Africa, when our lives very much depended on leavings of these big cats. And there was a time when the big cats of those days, which are saber-tooths and leopards, just like mountain lions, left big packets of meat. And it was those of us who were smart enough and crafty enough, careful enough, respectful enough, and cooperative enough are the ones that made use of these carcasses. There's also there have been some paleoanthropologists who have speculated even further in saying that these packets of meat, these windfalls of protein, if you will, these may have been responsible for triggering that explosive growth of that inimicable, you know what I'm trying to say, that organ of ours called the human brain. Okay. And now for those of us who were perhaps a little selfish, greedy, impetuous, not team players, those of us are the ones that were most likely to have ended up as the very carrion that they were out to steal. I try not to forget this when I'm up in lion country. As I said, I have been rambling all over lion country and never seen one. And it may be that I will never see a mountain lion, but what gives me hope is that, and it doesn't matter for me, for every other animal out there, what makes it different is the possibility that I may actually have, that there may actually be such a lion out there. And for me, that is the primary reason. That is the one reason why I think this animal deserves a day of its own. So once again, happy National Cougar Day to all of you, and thank you for joining in this celebration of the great cat.
Oh, thank you so much, Will. That was fantastic. Um, and we're going to move right into the Q&A, because I want to make sure we maximize our time there. So here's a question from Molly. Are biologists currently working on reintroducing pumas to the eastern United States? And if so, how long do you think it'll be before this happens, before they have a population in the eastern United States? And is there any way for people to support that?
Well, yeah, great question. A lot of people in the cougar conservation world are asking that question, but no, we don't. There aren't any political organizations, or I should say state wildlife agencies, who are welcoming the return of the cougar. There are those who in the past have said that, well, these eastern migrants, just like Walker, they will eventually repopulate the eastern United States. Well, that's, I mean, maybe, but certainly not in any of our lifetimes. And so if we want to make that a possibility before all those roads close to the mountain line, we have to make it happen. And as you might guess, that's a political hot potato. But again, the data is there. These lands can very well support mountain lions in the east, a lot of mountain lions, and they should be there. I mean, they are missing. We have some serious problems with overbrowsing of deer that any forest ecologist will tell you about, and something that the hunters aren't making a dent in, the human hunters. And so, and it's not to say that the mountain lion would be the cure-all, that the mountain lion could, solve any of these problems. But as we've seen, it is a keystone predator with a lot of other benefits that certainly is worth trying. Again, it's a matter of political will, and it's just as far as we know right now, it's still in its infancy.
Hmm. And do you have any more information about, you mentioned that there are some identified eastern habitats for lions, about where those generally are across the eastern US?
Yes, what I'll do is I'll post that paper, and it's got a wonderful map that shows every one of them being big green splotches of them. So you can imagine some of them, the Adirondacks, the Great North Woods, upper Minnesota and Wisconsin, a lot of big wildlands up there that are lightly populated, low numbers of livestock, lots of deer, and it turns out there's a lot of places in the United States that meet those specs.
Yeah, and so here's a question from Jeannie that I think maybe is grounds for some clarification, saying cougars don't relocate successfully, do they? They try to get back to their home range. Um, I don't know of any program that's transplanting mountain lions to the eastern United States. Um, it seems like, they're headed east on their own. But do you have any thoughts about cougar relocation?
Yeah, it has worked. In fact, way back when they first discovered that there were such a thing as a Florida panther, they were a myth for a long
Mhm.
time. They they found them. They brought a houndsman out, and he laid the myth to rest. It says they're here, but the population was so small that very soon they fell into this the death spiral of inbreeding. And they said we got to do something quick. This is an endangered species that's gonna disappear in our hands. And so they actually relocated several lions from Texas. They brought them in from Texas to impart some genetic diversity, and voila,
Mhm.
it worked. I mean, those lions didn't head home. They stayed there. They bred. They inserted their genes into the population, and it gave them a lifeline. It's a tenuous one. It's a temporary one. The populations, it's anywhere from 150 to 250 right now, but they're still kind of hemmed in. They're bottled into Southwest Florida, and there's another case where they need some help. They need some help expanding their range to once again to prevent this inbreeding that is bound to happen.
Fantastic. So from Roger, what about protection laws ahead of reintroduction? Like looking at eastern states where mountain lion repopulation is possible, and trying to get something on the books to protect mountain lions that are coming into those spaces.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question? I'm not quite understanding.
Oh, sure. Do you have thoughts about any kind of protective legislation for the eastern states for mountain lions ahead of their
Oh,
reintroduction?
gotcha,
You
gotcha.
know,
Yeah, right. No, there are some folks that are working on that too. Right now, some of the states do have kind of protections. You have to have a license, or you have to ask before you shoot them, or things like that. Some of them say just go ahead and like in South Dakota, it's 365 days a year. But yeah, I think an avenue which is maybe even more important than that is training the first responders to how to react to these cougars coming through. All right, if we're expecting these eastern migrants to be coming through places that haven't seen them for a century or so, the immediate reaction is, oh my God, it's a lion, we have to shoot it, right? Even though people live with them in LA and other places, all the big cities in the West have lions on the outskirts. So have been offers made to train police forces, train animal control officers how to deal with what happens when the cougar comes to town, rather than just shooting it. And that may be the first step, just and to keep people from blasting these migrants who. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit with that too, because number one, these animals that are making their way across the country, for the most part, they're the young males. They're the wanderlust animals, the ones that are most apt to leave and go far, far away to find their own territory, right? And females have not been shown to go so far. So, this idea of a leapfrog effect, you've got to get a mountain lion to establish itself, say 500 or 600 miles east of the Rockies, but then you've got to get a female to join it. See, and this is the kind of thing that
mm,
we really need to take care of those logistics of how cougars going to get here.
mm, absolutely. So here's a question from Bo. Are there fewer deer vehicle crashes in areas where mountain lions are stable than, say, in the eastern United States, where they're not?
Yeah. So this team that did that study that determined, well, if we brought them back, we'd save this many lives, this much property damage. They modeled that off after the Black Hills, which is kind of an
Mhm.
eastern outlier of the Rocky Mountains. And so mountain lions were eradicated from there. They came back in the 70s and 80s and built up a population. So what they did was they compared the before and the after. They've got a recolonizing population of mountain lions in the Black Hills, and they compared deer vehicle strikes before and the after, and that's where they got some of their information from.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that study information,
yeah,
especially when you look at the low relative population in South Dakota compared to other states and how impactful, cougar reintroduction was on saving human lives, that it's this extrapolation is large.
yeah.
Um, okay, so we have an anonymous attendee that lives in Utah, who is concerned that people in their state are hunting cougars for pleasure, not out of fear or other kind of resource concerns. And how do you think that we can address this issue, the issue that you know people aren't seeing this as a conservation problem, this is recreation, it's often even tourism.
Yeah. That's these are differences, I think, in morals and values and beliefs that we're talking about here. Um, I will say that a lot of people, they say they just like to hunt mountain lions, but oftentimes they will use as the rationale, well, I'm also doing a civil service. Like the guy that
Mhm.
we showed with the big tom in his grasp. He claimed he was out there trying to save dogs that this cougar was attacking. There was no evidence that that was happening. But the problem is that the state agencies, and I think we need to go to the top with this. The state agencies are the ones that are promoting this belief that, hey, it's good sport and it's a civil service. You're helping the deer herds, you're helping the elk, you're helping the people, the livestock. If you buy a cougar tag to kill a cat. As to those people who still just say, well, I like to kill cats, I don't know what to say to those. I mean, what we're seeing again is the more we learn about these cats is that these are really caring, social, suffering animals, just like your dog, just like your cat. I mean, would you go hunting your dog? Would you, put an arrow through your cat? I mean, ask these questions. There's not really much difference in the
Mhm.
scheme of things between the minds of these animals and the minds of the pets that we have sleeping with us. So it may take a long time, but I think we're getting there. The number of people in this country who do not like trophy hunting, do not like hunting for pleasure, is growing, and the number of people who are
Mhm.
out there actually doing the hunting is shrinking. So right now it's the minority rule. And
And
hopefully when we, again, I mentioned Wildlife for All is all about democratic rule. If we can keep making headway and getting more reasoned voices in our legislature, in our wildlife commissions, we can start changing those attitudes and making people think twice before they think this is fun sport.
and that perfectly segues into I think you've actually already answered, but I want to acknowledge Bill Woodbridge, who said that only 4% of the US populations are hunters. So the other 96% of us, it seems that we could gather the political will to outlaw hunting of mountain lions, bears, and wolves.
Yeah.
Um, and as you mentioned, it's a minority rule that there's kind of entrenched interest. Um, so I'm hoping that that's the case. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, well, the issue primarily for the state wildlife agencies is that they are ruled by politically appointed committees, and those committees are made up primarily of hunters and ranchers. And they have maybe the token conservationist on board, but primarily they're made up of the people who do not want predators around. That's got to change. And they're not educated. For the most part, these people don't know the biology. They're the ones that are saying that mountain lions are eating all the sheep, mountain lions are eating all of the deer. Basically, we're being run by people who barstool biology, they call it, right? I mean, they know better than these biologists who are out there tracking these animals 24/7, 365 days a year, right? That's got to change. The Wildlife Commission system has to change, or it's got to become more equitable, whereby we all get a voice in that. Right now, we don't, and it's not a matter of legislature. I mean, they in fact, they're the ones that are help setting some of the rules, which again are defeating our purposes. So, it's a slow slog, but again, I think there are some encouraging signs out there that we're finally making headway.
That's fantastic. And so speaking of kind of public management and conservation issues that perhaps mountain lions could be part of a holistic solution to, I'd love to give you just a short minute to talk about your experience with mustangs and mountain lions in your area. I know you touched on it briefly, but if you've got thoughts about, ways there, we also have a question about chronic wasting disease.
Yeah.
That some of these issues that currently our government's throwing a lot of money and a lot of targeted removal of ungulates at, that maybe mountain lion reintroduction could help with.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm sitting right on top of a really interesting story here in Reno, whereby, as I said, the Virginia range here is a hot spot. It's getting inundated by development, and it has 3,500 Mustangs roaming on the Virginia range, and a population of lions, as I said, that are doing a number on the foals. Now there's several wild horse campaigns now that are working to help these horses, which right now again are running out of room, but they're also eating themselves out of house and home. Water is an issue, forage is an issue, and so they are taking it upon themselves to institute a chemosterilization program. It's not actually a sterilization program. The animals basically can reproduce after a while, but it is bringing down the population of horses by a technique that the Bureau of Land Management, which manages most of the wild horses in this country, says does not work and refuses to use. And I mean, the National Academy of Science came out years ago and said that this is probably darting these animals with this PZP to prevent impregnation is probably the best way to go. Well, the BLM has ignored that. They're still relying on roundups, rounding these animals into big corrals where they're sold off. If they're not adopted, they're often sold to slaughterhouses, as it turns out. I mean, it's just a mess, and it's costing them a whole lot of money to house these animals. And the other argument they make is that, well, if the PCP program does not work and there are no natural predators, well, you know what? Maybe not in some of those wide open spaces where we don't have cougars, but in these mountainous places in Nevada, definitely we have animals. And these are, I'll tell you this one little story about the folks here that are helping some of the horses, that they name every one of those 3,500 horses. They have a name for every single one. They know their lineage, they know who they're related to. It's amazing their knowledge of these animals, but they do not name the foals. Why is that? Because the foals almost never last more than a few days. And why is that? Yeah. They're doing a really good job of decreasing the number of foals being born, but the few that are being born are not surviving. And they've seen, like, I think a 25% decrease in the population in the Virginia range, where everyone else talking about the population continues to climb almost, it's almost geometrically. So it's a huge problem everywhere else, but right here is a little testing ground for using two techniques, predators and PCP, to control the population. And right now, I mean, the data is in the hands of the conservationists.
Thank you so much, Will. I've appreciated and enjoyed this conversation immensely. And thank you to everyone who joined, everybody who's been with us. It's been a wonderful discussion. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And I appreciate you all tuning in to this Living with Lions webinar. We have members in all 50 states and around the world, and the Mountain Lion Foundation's work is funded by you, by individuals who care about mountain lions, their habitats, and the world we share with them. If you're not already supporting our work, you can become a member at mountainlion.org on our website, where we also have a lot of resources to learn more about these amazing animals, to find out how you can become an advocate in your own community. So our next webinar coming up is going to be fantastic. We had some questions about it in the Q&A. It will be on the historic fight to ban trophy hunting for mountain lions in Colorado, which perhaps could become a model for other states. It will be hosted by my wonderful colleague, Josh Rosenau, who's our Director of Policy and Advocacy, in conversation with Sam Miller, who is the campaign manager for this fight to protect cougars in Colorado. So definitely register for that one, and we'll see you all there. And Will, thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and this and all of our other webinars, you'll be sent a link, and they'll be available after some period of time on our YouTube channel as well. So you can share them with your friends and family. So thanks for spending your day with us, and we'll see you next time.